channel, Braintree District Council Committees. This channel has been set up to make sure that anyone can observe our democratic meetings. Please therefore remember that this meeting can be watched anywhere at any time by anyone with access to the internet. There are subtitles available on the YouTube broadcast. These are generated automatically by YouTube. The Council is not responsible for these subtitles or their accuracy. There is a short delay between the meeting and the broadcast of approximately 30 seconds, but this does not hinder the progress of this meeting. It is simply the broadcast. Webcasting officer, please can you commence the broadcast and confirm that we are proceeding live on YouTube?
Yes, I can confirm that is the case.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee on Tuesday the 7th of July 2020. Before we commence the proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings, and for ease of reference these are as follows. Please only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman know that you wish to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order that the request to speak is made, unless there is a point of order at that time we will be required to give way. Please minimise all distractions while you are in the meeting. Members are asked to mute their microphones when not speaking and consider turning off your video to reduce the interference on the audio feed and your broadband demand. Please bear in mind that there may be a small lag between speaking and other attendees hearing you, so please bear this in mind and do not attempt to overspeak other speakers. Presentation images and video footage should be made available to you in advance of this meeting and will be visible on the screens shared by officers. Please indicate via the chat function if you have a problem with any of the presentations. When referring to officer reports, please quote the page number and the relevant paragraph number if quoted. There is no private business for tonight's meeting. However, please can I remind you that it's the members' responsibility for dealing with private business, so please ensure that your venue and connection is secure. If you lose connection at any point and unable to rejoin the meeting, please call the meeting facilitator. We have provided you with contact details to do that. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed for requesting to speak or make a point of order. The chat function is subject to the access to information regimes such as freedom of information and environmental information regulations. It is also subject to data protection rules, rules of defamation and the Council's Code of Conduct. To assist with the management of the chat function, the agenda items will be included as place markers. There is a minute taker for this meeting and 2 meeting facilitators. I can confirm that this meeting is quorate for the purpose of the Planning Committee this evening, and all members in attendance with the exception of Councillor Bowers are present at this time. Should Councillor Bowers join the meetings, we will do a small test to make sure that he can be heard and be seen by the members of the committee, myself as the meeting facilitators, and can be seen on the YouTube broadcast. The Planning Committee consists of the following members. The Chairman is Councillor Mrs Scattergood. The Vice Chairman is Councillor Ona Parker. Then we have members Councillor James Abbott, Councillor Kevin Bowers, Councillor Tom Cunningham, Councillor Patrick Horner, Councillor Hilton Johnson, Councillor David Mann, Councillor Andy Mundy, Councillor Frankie Ritchie, Councillor Mrs Gabrielle Spray, Councillor Nick Unsworth and Councillor Justin Wrench. But we have apologies for Councillor Nick Unsworth for this evening. Officers for this meeting are in attendance, and these are Chris Padgey, the Planning Development Manager, Matthew Wild, Senior Planner, Lisa Page, Senior Planner, Carol Wallace, Senior Planner, Alex Evans, Planning Policy Officer. Alison Webb is clerk in this meeting. My name's Emma Wisby. I'm the meeting facilitator, and I'm assisted by Chloe Waite. I will now hand over the meeting to the Chairman, Mrs Wendy Scattergood. It is now 7:15. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Emma. Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
Welcome to our planning meeting. I am Wendy Scattergood, as you all know, and I'm chairing this meeting this evening. As you know, the Council is still quite new to virtual meetings, but I think the Planning Committee are probably more advanced than any other committee in the Council. But I will ask you just to still be patient and understanding. As you know, I'm being assisted by a governance officer, a meeting facilitator, who will help me identify people who wish to speak through the chat function. As I can't see you, please notify me through the chat function if there are any issues with your internet connection. Silence will be taken as assent during this meeting. I will now move on to the business of the meeting, and the first item is apologies for absence. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Unsworth, and that's all at the moment. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Could I just declare a general non-pecuniary interest? I'm a member of the Better for Braintree Facebook page, which often discusses a number of planning issues, and also specifically item C of the agenda this evening, item number 20002814, Discovery Centre, as Vice Chairman of Great Notley Parish Council, who were invited to comment but did not. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Non-pecuniary interest in item 5A, as I'm an ordinary member of Whittam and Countryside Society who've made a representation.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Could I make two non-pecuniary interests? One, as a member of the Better Braintree Together Facebook group that discusses a number of issues, including strong onus on planning. And second, also in line with Councillor Ritchie, as a member of Great Notley Parish Council, who were asked to make a contribution on Part A, C, regarding the Discovery Centre. I will remain in the meeting and vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. I do not have anyone else on the chat. Does anyone else wish to declare an interest before I move on? No. That brings us to item 3. Members, we have 2 sets of minutes to agree this evening, and I'll take them individually. The first is the Planning Committee held on the 2nd of June. Silence means you are approving these. Does anyone wish to raise any matters? No, they have been approved. The second set on the 9th of June. Does anyone wish to raise anything on the 9th of June minutes? No. Well, I will take those as being approved. That brings us on to item 4, public question time. We have no general questions this evening, and we're going on to item 5, planning, but I see that Councillor Bowers has joined the meeting. I don't know if you want to test him at his audio, etc. at this stage before I go on to item 5.
Please, Chairman. Councillor Bowers, it's Emma Wisby speaking. Can you just test your microphone for me and your audio link?
Sorry, Emma, I'm late. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can, thank you very much. You can see your colleagues on the transmission?
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, Chairman. Sorry, Madam Chairman, for being late.
It's quite all right. These things happen.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to the planning. If we go on to item 5, planning, we have no Part Bs this evening. And the first application is application number 20000146 Land Rear 59 Bridge Street, Whittam. And I do have statements on this application. The first statement is from the residents of numbers 59 to 69 Bridge Street, Whittam. And the statement is going to be read by by Alison tonight. Sorry, Alison, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you. We wish to confirm that we strongly object to the proposed building for the reasons given in our statements dated 11th February 2020 and 5th June 2020. Our main concern is a safety issue. The access is shared by the 5 terrace residents and the landowners with equal rights. It is used as pedestrian and cycling access by the residents daily. The garage, which has been here since the 1960s, blocks access to the land behind for other cars and so serves the purpose of limiting the use of the access driveway. The current garage user has never used the driveway on a daily basis. Two of the current residents have been living here since the 1950s and 1980s, and we are not aware of a car ever having been used on a daily basis. The previous landowner and garage owner was not a resident and lived some distance away in Highfields Road. The access is narrow, flanked on either side by a high wall and unlit. The front doorstep of house number 59 makes the driveway narrower still. The front door of 59 opens directly onto the access. Once this land is opened up to any property, there could be any number of cars accessing it, i.e. possibly 2 or 3 cars owned by the household, deliveries, carers, visitors, etc. The access to Bridge Street has poor visibility. Should visitors, including young children or the elderly, or residents be entering or leaving number 59, cars pulling in or out are a potential danger. It is also inconvenient and unneighbourly to have people regularly driving past your front door step. We believe it is not a feasible or safe option. Thank you for addressing our concerns. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. We have another statement on the same application, and this statement is from Witham Town Council. Can you read that one for me, please, Alison?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. As you are aware, the Chairman of Witham Town Council Planning, Applications and Transport Committee using his delegated powers, reviewed the revised plans under the above referenced application, and after due deliberation was of the opinion that the said revised plan to build 1 dwelling instead of 2 dwellings does not resolve any of the issues raised under the original plans. While noting the reduction in the number of proposed dwellings, the single bungalow remains, nevertheless, on an identical footprint in close proximity to existing properties. Furthermore, the issue of poor or even restricted ingress and egress to the property from a major thoroughfare has not been addressed by the revised plans. Thus, in confirmation of its written representation, dated 8th June 2020, Witham Town Council maintains its recommendation to refuse this application on the following grounds. 1. Overmassing of the site within a conservation area. 2. Poor ingress and egress on a major and busy thoroughfare, which is the main artery through the town and serves a number of bus services. The above recommendation is made after consideration of policy number RLP2 contained within the Local Development Framework. Witham Town Council further maintains that should the Planning Authority be minded to grant this application, contrary to the above recommendation, any trees removed from the site for its development must be replaced in liaison with the Planning Authority's landscape services. And that's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. And we have one final statement on this application, and that's from Mr. Russell Barnes, and he is the agent. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity for our comments to be presented with reference to this application. The Planning Officer has put this application forward to committee with a recommendation for approval following proactive engagement and discussions throughout the project lifecycle. Therefore, rather than labour points that have already been addressed by the officer, we thought it would be more useful for councillors if we simply highlighted some key points about this proposal. The application before you seeks to utilise a backland site to create a residential opportunity within the town development boundary of Witham. The location is within a highly sustainable area and benefits from access to a range of services and facilities. In addition, it has been agreed that the scheme satisfies the test of sustainable development as outlined in the MPPF by meeting the economic, social and environmental objectives. The proposal brings with it a range of improvements over the existing condition of the site, as well as taking into account the ever-changing requirements and needs of both current and future residents, and in turn reflects the demand for housing within the district. Throughout the application phase, the applicant has worked closely with the local planning authority in a positive and proactive manner to respond to concerns as they have been raised and to take decisive action to address and remedy them where possible. As a result, the application before you in its current form has no outstanding objections from Highways England, Environmental Health, the Ecology Officer, Essex County Council Highways, Historic Buildings or Landscape Services. Unfortunately, we were unable to mitigate all of the concerns raised by the Town Council, but we did respond in a positive manner to their main request that the proposed development should only consist of a single dwelling on this site. As with all concerns raised by the consultees, the applicant used best endeavours to address these points and to balance the objections raised against the project requirements. All neighbour concerns were assessed in detail by the officer in relation to the final application, and it was concluded that the proposal would not have a detrimental impact on any of the neighbouring properties and therefore was deemed to be policy compliant. Careful consideration has gone into developing a contextually appropriate design response which connects into the established community, positively responds to the conservation area and generates a safe, secure and inclusive environment through the creation of an accessible and adaptable dwelling. We hope that councillors will agree with the benefits this proposal offers, along with the provision of a small delivery of housing consisting of a single wingfall dwelling that contributes to support the needs of the district housing target. On behalf of our client, we would like to thank you for your time. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of statements on this application. We'll now come to the presentation. And the presentation is going to be made by Matthew. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, members. Bear with me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay, my screen is now shared, so you should be able to see my first slide. So the application before us this evening is for the redevelopment of the site to provide one 3-bedroom detached single-storey dwelling, and that's land to the rear of 59 Bridge Street in Witham. Okay, moving on to slide 2, the existing location plan. The site is behind properties located along Bridge Street and comprises a part of land which is accessed from an existing shared driveway, as you can see. It runs alongside number 59 and number 47 Bridge Street. The site measures approximately 690 square metres in size. The site, as you can see, is surrounded by residential development on all sides, apart from the west here, where there is a small strip of land that would remain in situ. The site is located within the Witham Conservation Area, as you've heard in public question time. Moving on to slide 3, the context. The context plan just illustrates the primarily undeveloped nature of the site and also the cluster of backland development, in which is fairly evident and commonplace in this area. Most of the vegetation on the site, which is sort of highlighted by my cursor, is scrub, although there are some trees which are lower quality. But the tree at the rear is to be retained, which is the best quality tree on the site. Okay, moving on to slide 4. The application proposes to demolish an existing garage which is located approximately here.
Apologies, Matt, for interrupting your presentation. We're getting slight feedback on your microphone, and we do want to make sure that members can hear your presentation clearly. We're just going to swap you out with a set of headphones. Members, if you mind, we just pause for one moment, because it is important that officers can hear the presentation. I do apologise for this.
How is it now?
Thank you, Matt. Apologies for interrupting your presentation, but it was important we could hear you nice and clearly. Thank you, members, for your patience.
Apologies if I was causing any disturbance. Right, I'll quickly go back. So the site existing site location plan, I've just talked you through that. If there is any sort of questions or queries at the end that I haven't covered or that you missed, then please let me know at the end of the presentation. So the proposed location plan. So as I was saying, the application proposed to demolish the existing domestic garage at the site and erect a 3-bedroom single-storey bungalow. The application previously sought to erect two-bedroom bungalows at the site on a building with the same footprint, but this was revised to 1 bungalow due to officer concerns about the access and parking. The new dwelling would be located an average of 18 metres away from the backs of properties on Bridge Street or here, and would be alongside numbers 39 to 45 Bridge Street over here. Moving on to slide 5, the block plan. While the access to the site is existing and can't be improved due to the buildings being alongside, etc., the surfacing of the private access road from Bridge Street would be improved with block paving and a turning area created along with 2 parking spaces for the bungalow. This would facilitate a turning area so that vehicles could enter and exit the site in a forward gear, as safely as possible. Obviously, there's been quite a few concerns raised at public question time in regards to highway safety, but what members have to remember is that the access is existing. Yes, there will be some intensification by virtue of 1 dwelling, but Essex Highways have considered the situation, and with this turning area and the single dwelling have now not raised an objection to the application. Some other points to think about. The site would provide 200 square metres of garden space at the rear, and as I was saying earlier, the scheme also proposes to retain this tree in the back, which is the best quality tree on the site. There's also an opportunity through a landscaping condition, which is proposed to enhance planting at the frontage here to perhaps soften any impacts, any visual impacts, but also replace any sort of vegetation that would be lost on the site. Moving on to slide 6, the proposed floor plan. So you can see it's 3 bedrooms, generous living area, study, etc. The roof plan is what it says it is. It's basically has been raised slightly compared to the original scheme to get a more traditional roof form. You'll see that from the elevation plans in a second, but it does also include some solar panels. Okay, moving on to slide 8. So this is the proposed front elevation now. So as was sort of highlighted in public question time, there's been lots of negotiation with the agents to secure a better scheme, and a lot of that's been around the actual detailing on the bungalow. So, for example, the stone headers, the exposed rafter feet. These are just some of the details that we've managed to secure to improve and enhance the overall quality of the building. And I'll just include the previous elevation of the bungalow just to show you sort of how far it's come. This was obviously for 2 bungalows, so the front door would have been at the side for both. But just in terms of that sort of character, the uncharacteristic weatherboarding's like been removed, and as I say, those stone headers are now being inserted, which is much more traditional than what was initially proposed. And just finally, just showing you the other elevations of the proposed bungalow that are for approval. Okay, just quickly, just to talk you through the site photos. So this is the access to the site as it is at the moment from Bridge Street. That's looking down the access, so 47 is on my left and 59 is on my right. One of the points that's raised in public question time was about the access to 59 being along this driveway. But as you can see, the door would open inwards, and actually there's a stone or concrete step there. So if the person was coming out, they wouldn't step directly onto the road. And then that's existing garage at the back there, which is to be removed. This picture is just looking at the garage, looking back towards Bridge Street, and you can start to see some of the rears of the existing properties along this strip. Apologies for the clarity of the picture, but it just hopefully you should be able to see enough to show the backs of the properties on Bridge Street. And again, not the best picture, but it just shows the backs of the properties, varying boundary treatments, so like a low brick wall here, but sort of higher close border fence further along. And the site is on my left. Okay, so the existing garage is in front of me here, and we're looking at the quarter house, which is the 39 to 45 Bridge Street, and their access points there and their main outlooks, the front and the back respectively. And you're looking at one of the trees, which is lower quality, to be removed. So this is the site itself. This outbuilding in the back is going to be removed. This tree at the back is the one that's going to be retained, which is of better quality. And then this is another photo of the that quarter house that I was just talking to you about on that tree and that relationship. And obviously this garage, as I've said, is to be demolished. And finally, this is just a photo just showing that that strip of land alongside the site, which would remain in situ. So that's not to be developed. Okay, just to sum up, so there's a number of benefits. The site is in a very highly sustainable location. There will be economic benefits during construction and social benefits once occupied. The proposal would provide good amenities and accommodation for future occupiers, provide good quality of detailing to reflect its conservation area setting, one dwelling towards the housing supply, limited harms, no detrimental neighbour impacts, no detrimental highway implications, and no, as I said, no objection risks highways, removal of most of the vegetation but retention of the best tree, and a landscaping plan to sort of offset any loss. So overall, officers consider that the benefits of the proposal outweigh the harms in the tilted balance, which, as members will know, means we don't have a 5-year land supply. So the recommendation tonight is to approve. As I've said, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Matt. The first person wishes to speak is Councillor Abbott. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and for the officer's presentation. I don't have an objection in principle to the redevelopment of this site. It is in a very sustainable location, but I think the two issues for me which cause concern are the access. The photographs show very clearly how tight that is coming between the buildings. But for me, actually, the main issue is the emergence onto the high street, onto Bridge Street. Anyone who knows the traffic through the centre of Witham, any access onto Bridge Street or Newland Street, you have to be extremely careful coming in and out. But it's an existing access, I accept that. But the second area I've got concern about is the landscaping and the loss of trees, which a number of representations did mention. And I have to say, Madam Chairman, it's extremely disappointing to yet again see the same repetition of all the trees are low quality, therefore they can come out. I read the private landscaping consultants report this afternoon, and it describes trees which, on the face of it, look to be quite healthy, including a couple of yew trees as being a very low quality. And I'd repeat the comment I've made previously. Have we ever had a developer's consultants report which says there's good quality trees on the site? They never do. They're always generically the same. And I think what really disappoints me is that the landscape department of BDC goes along with that. And in fact, the landscape officer, I've read his report, he actually wanted even that tree taken out in the corner. And he used the phrase something like a clean sheet and start again. So it's good that there is the one tree retained. However, we have an issue, I believe, and that is tree T5, which is an oak tree. Now, when the officer put up the block plan, that tree is clearly showed, if it's the same one as I believe it to be on the adjacent property. And yet the applicant is saying that tree would be removed. Now, I don't believe legally we could give, because this is a conservation area, the planning permission effectively gives legal rights to remove trees which are otherwise protected by the conservation area. I don't believe legally we can give planning permission to cut down a tree on someone else's property. And if it is the same tree that I think it is, the oak tree on the boundary, it would overhang the roof of the bungalow very, very significantly. So that's really the prime question I've got for officers, is how do we deal with that issue? And I would also take issue with the fact that that tree is not visible in the wider landscape. If you look at the views from Bridge Street across the Rafa car park, you can I've done it this afternoon from Google, just to remind myself, you can clearly see that oak tree visible from the street scene. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Did you wish to respond, Matthew, please?
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. I'd have to double check the report again, but if the oak tree isn't on the site, or it's not within the red line of the site, then the planning permission wouldn't give them consent to fell that tree effectively. It'd have to be covered by a separate conservation area consent, although, as you correctly say, in most circumstances, if the tree was located within the site, then that planning permission would trump any need for a conservation area consent. So if they wanted to remove that tree, then obviously we would be notified and get 6 weeks to comment as appropriate. But what I would say is that our landscapes team have carefully looked at the application and have raised no objections. So I'll take on board, of course, what you're saying. I think we can secure a good landscaping scheme here. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, could I just quickly come back then to suggest, because if it is the tree I believe it to be, T5, an oak tree, the applicant in his consultant's report described it as on the boundary. BDC officer's report just now showed it to be clearly on the other side of the red line boundary. Could we not add a note to applicant that that tree is not on their land? We believe it not to be on their land, and if it is not, they would need separate consent to do any work to it.
It's Chris to answer that, or is it Matthew going to answer it?
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Sorry, I just thought I would come in. Just while Matt was answering that question, I was having a look at the tree constraints plan that was submitted with the application. So this appears to be the updated plan on the system. So looking at T5, which, as you say, the canopy of which would overhang the roof of the proposed bungalow. The constraints plan shows it as being on the boundary. Now, the exact plotting, it looks almost 50-50 in terms of being on the application site and on the neighbour's site. So it's slightly unclear from that plan in terms of the ownership issue and exactly how we would stand on that. I would agree in terms of the comments that Matt has just raised there, and would suggest that we could put an informative onto that in that respect. But I just wanted to clarify that from the actual application submission, the tree appears to be on the boundary itself, as opposed to be on the neighbour's side.
Could we bring the block plan up again then, please? Because that shows the tree on the other side.
I'll ask Matthew. Can you?
Is this the plan that you want to see, Councillor Abbott?
That's the one, and you know, apologies if I've got this wrong, but I don't believe I have. I believe that tree shown there, just the other side of the boundary, could be T5.
Okay, I'll let Chris share the constraints plan as he has that to hand, if that's okay, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Apologies, members. I just had to download the plan there and get it onto my desktop. Bear with me, and I'll just share the plan. So hopefully we're able to see this. So this is the tree constraints plan that's on the application submission. So T5 is indicated here. Hopefully you can just see my cursor, which I'm just circling. You can see the boundary of the site. So I think compared with the site plan within Matt's presentation, the tree is shown in two slightly different locations compared with the block plan. However, this is specifically plotting the actual location of the trees. So my suggestion would be this is the accurate plan that shows the plotting of it, but notwithstanding, I think an informative on the decision notice could be added to the effect that's been suggested, that that is a point that is clarified, and the applicant would need to make sure that they would have effectively the right to be able to remove that tree, and that would be on the basis that the tree is within their ownership. So as Matt has suggested, so hopefully that plan just clarifies that particular point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I should turn my video on so you can see me. If I have any problems, please let me know. The question I wanted well, before I ask my question, I just want to say that I do think that the improvements to design that have been made are make it a much more attractive building, and well done to the officers for securing that. I do think that on balance, I note that it's a shame that always a shame that trees have to be felled, but I think when you're applying the planning balance, given the location, that it's a highly sustainable location, that probably unfortunately is outweighed by the desirability of having our dwelling in this location. The only thing is the access to number 59 as raised by the residents, and that very, very narrow access. I've noticed, thank you for the photograph showing the doorstep. It's probably a bit of an unusual question, but would there be any possibility of requiring the applicant to fit some kind of railing next to that doorstep so that the step is much more visible, and to give any person leaving number 59 a little bit more added protection? I wonder if you could respond to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will ask him to respond.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Yeah, it's quite an unusual suggestion, but yeah, I think from officers' perspective, we're satisfied, and Essex Highways is satisfied with the current configuration. I'm not sure that the railings really would make any difference, to be truthful. I don't think. I think it comes down to whether we can reasonably request that. I think because ultimately the red line includes the access, but that might not necessarily refer to the actual 59 itself, if that makes sense. So if we're requesting that they do works to 59 to facilitate this development, then there's potentially question marks around whether we can actually ask them to do that. But in any case, I think I think the situation as it is, and it will obviously be improved with the block paving. I think that is sufficient for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Does anyone else wish to add anything, please? Does anyone want to move something, please? Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually don't have any problem with this. I do think, I mean, the access is not ideal. It's, you know, we've seen it's quite narrow. And actually, I don't think that question or suggestion from Councillor Mrs. Parker was untoward. Actually, I thought it was a practical solution, but I understand it's not really achievable. It is a bit sort of stark, I think, coming out from that door, even with the step there. But I am going to assume and hope that the occasional car going up and down that access will be going slowly, given that it is quite narrow. So one hopes that you know, that will mitigate any danger to anybody coming out of number 59. So all in all, yes, I will move officers' recommendation for approval. I think the design is perfectly acceptable. They've done absolutely the right thing in reducing this to one dwelling. So I'll move officers' recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Does that include adding an informative that T5, the tree, the applicant must make sure that it is in their ownership?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. Councillor Mann?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you.
I think most of the objectors feature on the safety of the access, but again, we have no objection from county highways to fall back on. I do think that they have made a fairly valiant effort to work with officers, and the application, I think, has improved through negotiation. I'll support the informative as well to applicants. On balance, yeah, I think there's limited harm, and that this is something we can support.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anyone else wish to speak before I put it to the vote? No. Well, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this application with the informative as I just read out. I'm going to call the vote now. Councillor Abbott.
Abstain.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Rishi.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That application has been granted with the additional informative. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next application. The next application is number 20002034, Unit F6, Briersford Industrial Estate, Perry Road, Witham. And I do have a statement on this application. And the statement is from Claire and Richard Allen, who are the applicants. I'm going to ask Alison to read it. Alison, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you. We are operating a small group training studio in Witham in a medium to large sized unit E2 on Briersford Industrial Estate. This is close to the town centre, 5 minutes walk, with ample parking. With the agreement of our landlord, we wanted to move to a smaller unit, F6, on the same estate and owned by the same landlord. This requires change of use from B1C to D2. There are 4 units vacant on the site of that size, so this makes it 40% empty. Given the current economic climate, this is incredibly important for the survival of our business that we move. However, it seems that the planning officer has some reservations. with regards to the change of use, as this would reduce the stock of B1C units and not be sustainable in terms of the future demand for office space. In fact, we would be freeing up a larger unit if we moved, which would increase the stock of B16 space if this were turned back. Our landlord and ourselves, in fact, would see no objection to Unit E2 being returned to B1C use. The planning officer states there is no legal mechanism to do this. On approval of the change of use for F6, we would be happy to pay for an application of change of use for the larger E2 unit to go back to B1C, if this helps our current application. In terms of the demand for office space, we would like to point out that the smaller units are currently 40% vacant on this site. According to the planning officer, the location for a leisure use would be better in the town centre, except there are no suitable facilities available there. As the type of training we provide includes elements of gymnastics, and we would therefore need a high building for rope climbs and use of rings. There are therefore no suitable buildings within the town centre. The planning officer claims that she has shared information of similar businesses which could share our current unit with us. This would not be practical in terms of prime time for classes and the different layout of equipment needed for other businesses. We are an existing business with an existing client base, and all we are asking to do is to move to a small unit which is located less than 50 metres away from our current unit. As pointed out by the planning officer, health and fitness businesses bring many benefits to the community, and particularly in our role in helping to prevent diseases such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, all of which are not only a risk factor in the current climate, but are also a growing national problem. We hope that the committee will agree to help support our local business in these difficult times. Many thanks in anticipation for your support. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. No further statements on this application, so we'll go straight to the presentation, and that is going to be made by Lisa. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will just try to share my screen. Has that shown up? Bear with me one moment. Bear with me, I'm having some difficulties showing my screen. Yeah, lovely. I think we're there now. Sorry for that. Okay, that should now be showing. Perfect. Apologies. So this is a full application for the change of use from B1C light industrial to D2 assembly and leisure, which will be for personal training purposes, and it's at unit F6 in Briarsford Industrial Estates, Perry Road in Witham. Slide 2 is, I should say the application is being reported to Planning Committee in accordance with the Council scheme of delegation, as Witham Town Council support the proposal contrary to officer recommendation. Slide 2 here is the location plan. So the site Sorry, I'm having some IT issues there. It's just that I dropped out, so bear with me. I just dropped out of the meeting and now... Okay, I'm back, sorry. Can everybody see that? Fine, apologies. So the location plan here, the site's situated within the Witham Town development boundary. It is a vacant unit currently, which has a B1 use, and it's located, as we've heard, within the Brisford Industrial Estate, which is a designated employment policy area. Slide 3 here shows is another location plan. It just shows the car parking provision for the site. So the unit benefits from 2 allocated parking spaces within the immediate frontage, and there is further parking provided in a communal parking forecourt. As we've heard, the applicants currently occupy unit E2 on the same industrial estate for group personal training within a D2 use, and it's their intention to move from their existing unit, which here, as I'm hovering, to this smaller unit. Slide 4 now is just showing some photographs of the site. So the unit that they're seeking to change the use is this number F6, and you can see the 2 parking spaces to its frontage. Slide 5 is just another photo that shows the unit on the left-hand side. E2 sort of in the distance here, CrossFit, you can see the existing unit they occupy, and here to the right-hand side of the photograph is the communal forecourt parking. Slide 6 is just a slightly wider photograph of the industrial estate there, and you can see the other units and sort of the parking provision. So in summary, the site is located within the Brisford Industrial Estate. It is a designated employment policy area. Both adopted and draft local plan policies state that proposals within employment policy areas for other uses than those within B1, B2 and B8 will be refused. Indeed, members will be aware of a number of recent applications where permission has recently been refused for similar D2 uses within employment areas, and the Council is consistently applying the policy in this regard. Of note is the recent refusal that has been successfully defended on appeal for the change of use from B1 to D2 use within Witham, and this recent appeal dismissal is attached as the appendix to the report. The application proposes no external changes to the appearance of the unit, and there will be no harmful impact on neighbour amenity. In terms of highway consideration, the use would require a maximum of 5 parking spaces. The unit, as we've heard, has 2 designated car parking spaces within its curtilage and further shared provision within the parking court, so that would be acceptable. So in the overall planning balance, the harm identified would outweigh the social benefits, and officers recommend that Planning Commission should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I think in light of the recent appeal decision, the policy position on this has sort of crystallised more clearly. And for me, where the officers say that they don't believe there's a legal mechanism through conditions or section 106 where you could effectively make a decision, we could effectively make a decision tonight that would allow them to swap the premises over, because it appears that the swap actually would liberate slightly more of the employment use we want. But my question for officers is, are the applicants here not in a chicken and egg situation? So if we refuse this tonight, they can't use this unit for the purpose they intend. But if they were to separately apply to change the existing unit back, they've got no guarantee that we'd do that for the new unit, and then they'd be homeless. So is there a way out of that? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Response.
Thank you. Yes, I see the point you're making in terms of it's a little unfortunate that sort of at simple face value, it does look like there's just a simple swapping of the units. However, that is something that officers have given consideration to in terms of if they did apply for both the units at the same time to convert them, and would that overcome the concern? Because I appreciate that the unit that they currently occupy is a larger unit, and the application that they're looking to change is a smaller unit, but we've looked at the legal implications of it, and there just isn't a mechanism to secure that the existing unit would be converted back to a B1, B2, B8 use prior to this new D2 use commencing. So we don't feel that could be secured via condition or a legal agreement in this instance.
Thank you, Lisa. Does anyone else wish to speak, please? Councillor Ritchie. Oh, sorry, Councillor Parker first. Sorry, I missed. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I think we were nearly at this asking to speak at the same time. I'm sort of thinking again about this this desire to swap effectively. Would it be possible to have two applications made at exactly the same time, determined at exactly the same time? Would that be a possibility? I understand the point about the condition. Just ask that question, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Again, this is something that officers have considered in terms of whether an application could be submitted that covers both of those units, and almost it's a sort of joint change of use for those units, but officers don't feel that they would be able to secure that the existing unit they would have to secure that change of use, and for it to be then reused as a business use before that lawful use, I guess, kicks in. So we wouldn't be able to condition that the new use, the new D2 use, could operate prior to that B1 unit being converted back, if I've made that clear. So that is something officers have considered, but there's just not a legal condition or Section 106 route that could secure that, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's not a question, just merely a statement I just wished to make, that unfortunately, again, we've kind of faced with another missed opportunity to introduce some much needed community fitness outlets alongside some employment land. Now, whilst I completely get that it's against current policy, and I completely get that the change of use from the light industrial isn't allowed under that policy. I think this just kind of pushes the agenda more around understanding how we as a planning authority can support some change that helps to support more of these local initiatives, particularly those that are giving back to the community by way of keeping people fit and healthy, away from the doctors and away from the NHS. Again, it's a missed opportunity. The fact that this is, again, another application that's going to fall by the wayside shows that there is a need and there is demand for it. And whilst we can't supply that within the town centres, we are a little bit hamstrung as a planning authority to approve some of these applications in the correct areas. I look forward to working with our planning team members in how we can affect some of these changes, and I see Councillor Spray kind of nodding in the background. I have worked with her in the past to try and work alongside some of this, but unfortunately for the community, it's another missed opportunity, and for that I am quite saddened. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chair. Just a general question. This problem has been round now for about 18 months, and we get lots of nods and winks that policy is going to be reviewed, examined, looked at, some other solution to be put forward. But this is something that's going to reoccur, we may be sure. We've had perhaps a string of half a dozen applications like this. So I just would like to ask senior members and officers what progress is being made on looking at this problem, which is apparent in all of the 3 major towns?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll ask Chris Padgett to come back on your query.
Thank you, Councillor Mann, for the question, comment, and also to acknowledge Councillor Ritchie's statement there in terms of the wider benefits of these types of uses and the current issues we have in terms of the adopted policy position that we have. That's fully acknowledged by officers as well, and these are difficult applications to deal with because there are clear benefits for the actual use that's proposed, and it's the issue that needs to be addressed is finding a suitable location for them and actually having this policy support in place within with the council's adopted development plan. So this is a matter that has been discussed between development management and planning policy. Obviously, the local plan is progressing, and it's a matter that would be addressed hopefully within section 2 of the council's emerging local plan. There are outstanding objections, I understand, from Sport England to section 2 of the emerging draft local plan. So while I can't give a precise update on this, because obviously this is a matter that's being led by colleagues in planning policy, it is something across the teams that we are more than aware of and also wish to get resolved, because in the same way that we want to ensure there's sufficient allocations for employment uses and that these are protected for those uses, equally we need to ensure the same applies for important leisure uses and health and wellbeing facilities across the district. So all I can say this evening is that this is a matter that is on officers' agenda, and it is something that we will take forward as best we can as part of the local plan process.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mrs. Can I have Mrs. Spray next, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, it's another very, very tough decision for this committee, actually. I don't think there's probably any member of the committee present tonight who enjoys, having to make decisions like this. I think we are all understanding and sympathetic towards the applicant, but it comes, fairly hot on the heels of the decision we had to make with a complete dance application and an inspector upholding our decision to refuse that. It's against policy, that's the problem. But Councillor Ritchie's quite correct. He and I had a meeting, so it was a few months ago before lockdown. We had an actual meeting with senior officers, and there is a real willingness on all sides to try and address this so that we don't have to keep turning down, very good applications like this. And it will, I think, just have to wait for section 2 of the draft local plan, when we can probably do something about changing policy or making some alterations. That's a few months away, but hopefully not too many, and then we will be able to do something that avoids us having to make quite tough decisions. I have absolutely every sympathy with the applicant. I do think officers have tried really hard to see if there was a way around it, but unfortunately it is not just as simple as them swapping units or sharing a unit with another business. I do think officers have tried hard, but sadly, where we are at the moment, it's against policy. So I am going to move officers' recommendation for refusal. I don't take any pleasure at all in doing that, but I'm hoping that if everybody can hang on a bit, in a few months' time, we may have a different situation and we may be able to give, different results. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Does it find a seconder? No seconder.
Councillor Monday, and I'll second it, although I share the same opinion as Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, it has been moved and seconded that we refuse this application. I am going to put it to the vote. I know it's a vote that none of you really want. Councillor Abbott.
For, reluctantly.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For with reluctance.
Councillor Horner.
For with reluctance.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson.
Can you hear me?
I can now.
I'm losing the sound. It's coming and going, and I can't hear what's going on most of the time. I keep losing the internet.
All right. Well, are you voting for or against this application?
I'm voting against.
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 Yeah. Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
Abstain.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For, reluctantly.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you very much, members. That application has been refused reluctantly. Thank you. But now we move on to application C, which is application number 20000281 full Discovery Centre, Great Notley Garden Village, London Road, Notley. This is an application that was deferred at a previous meeting. I'm sure you all remember it. It's going to be presented by Lisa, and we have no statements on this application. So we'll go straight to the presentation. Thank you, members. Thank you, Lisa.
Apologies, Chairman. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to make sure that Councillor Johnson can hear you now. Councillor Johnson, can you confirm you could hear the Chairman, please?
I can hear the Chairman.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Apologies, Chairman. Apologies, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll just share my screen. Lovely. So this is a full application for the replacement of metal luminaires with LED luminaires to existing lighting provision on the artificial turf pitch and multi-use games area or MUGA at the Discovery Centre, Great Notley Garden Village in Great Notley. And as we've heard, members will recall that this application was reported to committee last month, where it was deferred to enable officers to clarify a number of matters in regards to light spillage. This application is being reported to committee in accordance with the council scheme of delegation, as the applicant is Braintree District Council. So slide 2 here is the location plan. It's located towards the north of the country park and consists of an existing 3G artificial synthetic pitch and a multi-use games area. As existing, there are 8 10-metre high floodlighting columns to the edge of these pitches, and these were granted under a 2008 planning application. Slide 3 here is the site plan. You can see the existing columns, 4 to the northern side of the pitch and 4 to the south. Although there are only 8 columns, there are 12 luminaires, and this is because 4 of the columns contain 2 luminaires each. So the application, as we've heard, seeks permission to replace the 12 existing metal luminaires with 12 LED luminaires, and the existing columns and infrastructure will remain. So looking at some photographs, slide 4 here is a photograph taken from the northwest of the site, and you can clearly see the 4 existing lighting columns here, and 1, 2, 3, and 1 sort of hidden here, sort of in the backdrop of the trees. Slide 5 is just another angle of the pitches. This is taken from the west, looking across the 2 pitches with the larger 3G pitch in the foreground. So looking at the proposed lighting in a bit more detail, members may recall seeing this previously. The main pitch lighting will use the 2 module light engines with narrow beam, and the luminaires is 1000 watt, which is reduced from 2000 watt as existing. The luminaire type also reduces from 4500 colour temperature to that proposed at 4000 K, which is neutral white. Now, during the course of reporting this back to committee, there's been some investigation as to whether the proposed 4000 K could be reduced further. And it's understood that the 4000 K is the optimum level for sports provision. And in fact, if this was to be lower, it would require the installation of extra lighting to meet the sporting requirements. So looking at now slide 7, which is the smaller pitch, this will use the 3 module light engines with narrow beam. The luminaire on these are 1500 watt. And as before, the luminaire type also reduces to 4000. So slide 8 here is showing some of the light spillage, and this is one of the reasons why the application was deferred back in June. So on the left-hand side, you can see the horizontal spillage for the application that's before us, and on the right-hand side is the horizontal spillage that was approved on the 2008 application, and is obviously the current spillage that is on site currently. So if you're looking, it's a little bit difficult to see, but if you're sort of looking at this sort of right hand side of the picture, you can see that it's inset more from this footpath, and here it's a little bit closer to the south. You can see that on the existing on site as today, the light spillage extends further to the south than the proposal would be. On the eastern side, if you use the tree here really as a bit of a point, you can see today the light spillage extends far beyond that tree, whereas with the proposal it would sort of be much reduced, and equally to the north there's a reduction. Slide 9 here, it's not overly clear, I apologise, shows the tilt design in a bit more detail. So this here would be the top of your 10-metre high floodlighting column. You can see the new LED that's proposed here. It's at 11-degree fitting to the horizontal. This provides a peak intensity of light at 65 and 6 degrees to the pitches. Now, the spillage plans that were shown in the earlier slide are based on the light spillage that would occur from these fittings. So overall, they demonstrate that the spillage will be tighter. Now, we've had some discussions as to whether or not louvers or cowls would be required, and given this design, and as we've seen from the light spillage plans, that would not be a requirement on this application. Officers are recommending that condition 4 be altered to include a requirement that the light fitting be undertaken in accordance with this 11-degree horizontal fitting to enable this 65 and 66% tilt design. So in summary, the principle of the lighting to these outdoor sports pitches has already been accepted with the grant of the application in 2008, which are obviously on site today. The supporting documentation demonstrates that the development would not cause obtrusive light pollution or spillage, and indeed would result in an improvement in these matters. The lighting scheme will provide better quality provision and energy efficiency, as the luminaires would reduce from 2000 watt as existing to 1000 and 1500, resulting in between 50 and 25% reduction in power consumption. The proposed floodlighting system is specifically designed to fulfill sports lighting requirements and is suited to applications where low light pollution is essential. The luminaires are specifically designed to minimise light spillage and glare beyond the area which is intended to be lit. The hours of use of the pitches will be in accordance with that already consented, and this will be secured by way of condition. Control switches and time clocks will be installed on the floodlights to ensure they do not remain on any later than the permitted hours of operating. Officers are content that there will be no unacceptable impact to neighbours in terms of obtrusive light pollution or similar, and there would be no undue impacts to passing vehicular traffic or pedestrians. In regards to ecology, and in particular bats, there would be an improvement to the existing situation, as the lighting spillage from the proposed design is better than the existing. Further, the luminaires would reduce and would alter from 4,500 colour temperature to 4,000. So officers are recommending that plan permission be granted subject to the conditions outlined in the report, but a variation to condition 4 to include specification on the lighting design to be altered to require that the LED fittings will be in accordance with, as we've seen on the slides, which is this 11-degree to the horizontal, which provides peak intensity of light to those courts. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Lisa. Thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And can I first of all thank officers and the applicant for their indulgence in discussing this application. And I should repeat what I said last time this came before the committee, in that I don't have any objection in principle to the replacement of the lights with LED. They are generally more energy efficient. However, I regret to say that having had all those discussions, I still can't support this. When I raised this, when this came up at full council, I asked the cabinet member, will these lights, replacement lights, be best practice? And she confirmed they would be. Well, I'm afraid they're not. And the reason for that, apparently from the applicant, is that we've got to have a compromise. And the compromise, from what I can gather, is due to two issues. One is the column heights. So these lights are going to go on the existing columns. So what you're doing is retrofitting onto existing columns. And the second thing is that the lighting heads are very heavy, and that therefore they can't have any additional weight on them, such as cowling or shielding, because it would make them too wind resistant. If this was best practice, these lights should be angled at 0 degrees to the horizontal, flat to ground, which means there's no physical ability for the light to shine out above the horizontal. But we're actually applying a condition that they be tilted upwards at 11 degrees. So that's still possible if you had cowling and shielding to make sure the light only goes where you want. But I've checked with the applicant, and the applicant confirms there's going to be no cowling. And indeed, there's going to be no use of internal baffling within the LED units themselves to ensure that the light is directed as tightly as it could be. So I'll leave it up to members to make their decisions, but this isn't best practice. I think we could be doing a lot better than this. The applicant claims that there'll be an improvement over the existing situation. I do hope that's the case, but I think the proof's going to be in the pudding only when they're put on. And I, for one, will be very interested to see what they look like compared to now, because I fear they won't be an improvement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Does anyone else wish to speak on this item, please? No. Councillor Mrs. Spray, thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Well, I've said I'll speak. I'm not quite sure how to respond, actually, because reading the report, I rather hoped that we got an acceptable solution here. I think it was quite right of Councillor Abbott to, suggest that we deferred this last time, and I had rather hoped that we'd got the solution. He seems to think that this is still not satisfactory. I'm a bit baffled. I don't know if we can have a comment from officer at all. I'm really unsure as to what to do. I don't want to move. Well, I'd like to move approval, but I don't particularly want to if then we're going to finish up with something that's no better than we had than last time, and they're still going to cause light pollution. Any comment from officer to help us out at all, please?
I'll ask Chris Pudgy to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Spray, for the question. I think there's 2 points here, really. The first is responding to the actual planning application before members this evening for consideration. So from officers' perspective, we consider that the proposals as revised does represent an improvement on the existing situation. So in planning terms, the proposal is acceptable, which is why officers' recommendation is for approval this evening. I absolutely fully note the point that Councillor Abbott has said, and I'm acutely aware that he has an awful lot of technical knowledge as well in this particular area, so officers do acknowledge that. I suppose there's 2 issues which need to be separated. Is the point around best practice and the what could be described as the optimum solution potentially for the lighting in this location versus what's before us, and is it acceptable in planning terms. So the decision members have got to make is whether or not the application before the committee this evening is acceptable and whether or not there are grounds to refuse. Officers' advice based on the improvements that Lisa has outlined as part of the presentation as detailed in the report is that there is a reduction in light spillage. There are various other improvements in terms of energy efficiency, and from an ecology perspective we are comfortable as well. So separating the 2 issues, the proposal before members from officers' perspective is acceptable in planning terms. On the other side, from the applicant perspective, which is Braintree District Council, could there be a better solution than what is proposed? That is a separate matter, and that might be a matter that needs to be raised separately with the applicant before this is actually installed to see whether or not an alternative could be proposed. But from a planning perspective, we've got to make a decision on the planning merits of the particular proposal. So hopefully that provides members with a little bit of clarification. Happy to answer any other questions though.
Thank you, Chris. Lisa would like to come back before I move on. Thank you, Lisa.
Chairman, just a point really picking up on that best practice and that 11-degree tilt that's being proposed as this application. So really just to answer a question in terms of if the application was to require a 0 degree to the horizontal, then that would require higher lighting columns. So again, that the higher lighting columns in themselves would result in further impact in terms of visual impact and sort of impact on that countryside location anyway. So there is a balance to be had. Officers, as Mr. Padgett has just outlined, are content that the application details are acceptable and would result in an improvement. So I think even if we were looking at could we reduce that tilt, we need to bear in mind that if we were asking for that, there would be associated impacts in terms of much higher lighting columns. Obviously at the moment they're only 10 metres. Anything larger than that would have more of an impact on that setting. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Councillor Mrs. Spray, you've asked to come back.
I have, although I see that Councillor Abbott wants to speak again. Can I let Councillor Abbott go first, please?
Certainly. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. So one of the issues we've got here is that this is a compromise. And I accept what the officer says. We've got the existing column heights and the new heads are being fitted to the existing columns. So you've instantly got a compromise. But the other thing is, are these heads actually the best that they could be done in order to achieve what's required? And I don't believe they are. And particularly given that there's no external baffling and no internal louvres within the light LEDs themselves. So these are fittings within the actual LEDs themselves, which would direct the light more carefully. What we could do as a suggestion is, in my discussion with the applicant, they said they can guarantee this scheme will produce something what's called 0 ULR, 0 upward light ratio, which means that no light is going above the horizontal. My suggestion is we could add a condition to require that, so that if these units didn't prove to be quite as good as they said they would, they'd have to do something about it to achieve 0 ULR. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. I'll let Councillor Mrs. Spray come in now.
Well, if that is possible, if officers think that that condition could be added, then that sounds like a possible solution. If so,
okay,
I'll move officers' recommendation for approval, but just appreciate a comment from officers on that suggestion. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, just coming.
Sorry, apologies, Mrs. Spray. Your microphone was off when you said that. My apologies.
Sorry. I'm going to ask Lisa to come back, Councillor Mrs. Spray, before we move on.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, just coming back to both of you there. Yes, Councillor Abbott is correct in that the agent is suggesting that the upward light ratio is 0%. I think the concern would be in terms of if we were putting a condition on requiring that to be the case in terms of enforceability and how we would be sort of really going out on site and checking that is the case. I think that would be a concern for officers in terms of the enforceability of such a condition. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs. Spray. She wants to speak.
All right. Well, I think based on the information we've had from Chris and Lisa, thank you both of you. I'll move officers' recommendation for approval. I'm just going to hope that when this is up and running, that it is satisfactory. I'm not 100% convinced, but I'll move officers' recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Councillor Ritchie.
Yeah, it's just to second officers' recommendations, Madam Chairman.
Do you wish to add anything further? Or?
No, I mean it's a bit of a shame that we can't add a condition where there can be a post-install check just to ensure that it is meeting the expectation. Is there nothing that could be added just to give us that level of assurance that it has met anything?
Councillors, I will ask. I'll ask Chris Padgett to come back once more, just to give us a bit of insight, if possible.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. I would suggest, as Lisa said, a condition is slightly problematic in this particular case, but if members felt strongly, we could add an informative to the decision notice, and I'm more than happy as well to take this up with colleagues directly to pass on the feelings of the planning committee. Obviously, it's been debated on 2 occasions now, and to pick up this point of Councillor Abbott in terms of the best practice point. But I would suggest that's probably better as a suitably worded informative as opposed to a condition on the planning permission if members decided to grant the application this evening. I think we just need to be clear in terms of what message members wish to convey as part of that informative, whether or not it is through, looking at best practice measures, or whether or not it's the point, the more specific point around the upward light ratio point at 0% and actually achieving that. So we'll be guided by members at that, but I would suggest an informative would be the appropriate way forward.
I'd be happy with that, Chairman. I think that gives us some comfort, and I guess if we can be as specific as possible in the informative.
Are you going to propose an informative, or are you expecting officers to prepare it for us?
No, I'll. Well, Chris seems to be saying that he wants some direction from us, so I'm guessing we should have an informative added. Could do with some help here from Councillor Abbott, almost really, as to whether we go for best practice or the other option. Councillor Abbott, can you help me out slightly?
Councillor Abbott, can you?
Well, yes, thank you. The issue with best practices, it may need redesigning the actual units, and then you've got the issue that conditions state the plans are set out. You're not complying with the plans. So I thought the easiest thing, and I'm not quite sure why officers thought this is unenforceable, is to require 0 upward light ratio. On lots of applications, we do have planning conditions on lighting, and they require applicants to submit details on precisely those technical details. So I'm not quite sure why we couldn't actually have that as a condition. And that would, for me, that would largely deal with the issue, because I think then whatever the design is, whatever the tilt is, they've got to require the light is aiming downwards and not upwards.
Well, I agree, but I do agree, but if it seems that officers are saying it really is not practical to have the condition, then I think we have to go for the informative, but not best practice, but whatever the other wording was, and I've lost the plot with what the other wording was now.
Uplighting, wasn't it?
Uplighting. Okay, let's go for
ULR, upward light ratio.
That's it.
ULR.
That's it. Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Right, let's go for that. I think if that's, I do think we need to sort of put this one to bed tonight, so to speak. So if that's what we need to do, and it gives us a bit of comfort, then fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. As you seconded it, Councillor Ritchie, are you happy with that?
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to put this one to the vote now. This is to vote to approve with the informative. Councillor Abbott.
Abstain.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you very much, members. That application has been approved. We now come to the final application. Before I go on to the application, I would like to introduce Carol Wallace. It is her first attendance at our planning committee, and I'd like to welcome her on behalf of all the committee. And we are now going to go to application number 20000341 full, Hunts Hall, Cone Road, Pembrokeshire. And it's going to be presented by Carol, and we have no statements on this application. So we'll go straight to her presentation, and welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Let me try to share my screen. Can everyone see my slides? Yeah.
Yes.
So, sorry. So application 20/00341/full application is for proposed change of use of agricultural buildings into storage use, B8 use with associated parking. The location is within Hunts Hall Farm in Pembrokeshire. Slide 2 shows the location plan. The red boundary shows the application site, and the blue boundary shows the remaining land owned by the same applicant. Slide 3 shows the location of the farm itself. It is located to the southwest of the village. It's about 1.4 kilometers from the village center, and is about 1.4 kilometers to the east of major highway A131. Slide 4 shows the context plan. Where my cursor showing is the application site, which is which is the largest building within the farm. Slide 5 shows the existing block plan. And slide 6 shows the proposed block plan, and that's including 10 parking spaces. Slide 7 shows the existing floor plan. And slide 8 shows the existing elevations together with the cellar. Slide 9 shows the proposed floor plan. Basically, the applicant is not proposing major alterations to the floor plan, and is proposed to remove the silo to the west of the building. And slide 10 shows the proposed elevations. The only external alterations will be the existing timber frame doors will be replaced by a new roller shutter doors. Slide 11 shows the photos of the existing vehicular driveway from Cone Road. To the left is the vehicular entrance, and the application site is the first building behind the tree here. Slide 12 shows the cellar and the application building. The building is currently not in use, and it was used as a chicken shed previously. Slide 13 shows the southern elevations, which is the elevation facing the internal road of the wider farm. Slide 14 shows the eastern and northern elevations. And slide 15 here shows the existing cellar. And proposed parking is further down to the right-hand side. Slide 16 shows the most relevant policy when considering this application, which is policy RLP 38. The policy itself allows conversions of rural buildings for commercial use as part of farm diversification. Slide 17 shows the summary of the application. As mentioned before, apart from the new roller shutter, there's no other external alterations. The existing cellar to the rest of the building will be removed. There will be 10 parking spaces provided, and out of these 10, 2 of those will be disabled parking. officers is of the view that the proposal is acceptable in principle. It is generally in line with the most relevant policy, policy LLP 38. This application is reported to the planning committee because of parish objection, which is contrary to officers' recommendation. But apart from parish council objection, there's no other objection from statutory consultees. After assessing all the planning considerations, officers are of the view that there's no unacceptable impacts on the local character, setting of the listed building, local amenities, landscape, ecology or highway safety issues, and therefore is recommending for approval with conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Carol. Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have any problem actually with the purpose for this application. I think that's fine. I do have a concern, something which affects not just Pedmarsh, which is in my ward, but also actually at least in part Councillor Scattergood's ward. Pedmarsh is a small village. It's just on the border with Henny, and actually there are some small villages around there in Councillor Scattergood's ward, Lamarsh and Alphamstone as well. And the problem is large lorries using very small local country lanes. What we don't want is traffic going through Pedmarsh or Henny. Both Councillor Scattergood and I have been in receipt recently of emails from residents not concerned with this particular application, but with existing businesses all around our patch, where they are experiencing great problems with HGVs using these very small lanes and causing quite a lot of damage. And this could well be another case in point. It rather depends on what route the traffic uses. On page 64 of our agenda, under highways and parking, the penultimate paragraph there, I'll just quote briefly from it, from the officer's statement in there, which is officers consider that most of the traffic generated is likely to be directed to the A131 to access Halstead, Civil Headingham or Braintree town centre to the southwest and to the west, or Sudbury to the north, and the A1124 to Colchester to the southeast. Hence, the traffic is unlikely to travel through the village of Pedmarsh to access the site. It is not considered that the scheme would place undue pressure on the local highway network. I'm not entirely convinced by that. You know, if I'm going to move approval of the application because I think there's no reason not to, and I say I'm not against it at all. I realise that I believe I'm right saying we can't impose a route because this is public highway. We're not in a position to tell anybody what route they can use. But I think if there's any way that we can attach I guess it would have to be an informative, it can't be a condition, to the applicant, asking them to do their best to advise drivers that they need to avoid the very local lanes and try and stick to the main routes. If we can do something along those lines, I would feel a little happier about it, because there is no doubt that local residents are, you know, they're quite right in their concerns about the level of large vehicles using these small lanes. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. As Councillor Mrs. Spray has mentioned my ward, I'd just like to point out that we have two such businesses in Alphamstone, and the only route from the A131 that these lorries can take is through the village of Twinsted. Now, there is no other route from the A131 to Pedmarsh other than going through Twinsted. So you can imagine why my phone has been ringing and my door's been knocked on, because people are very concerned about even more lorries. It's all very well saying keep to the main road. They've got to come off the main road to get to this place. While I understand that these businesses have to continue, I do agree that we need to find some form of route, and we ask the owner to ask their lorries to use the route the best there is, because there are 3 routes, 2 are absolutely impossible, and 1 is just about passable. And I do think perhaps if we could do that, it would help this situation. But now I'll ask Councillor Mann to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is within policy. No external alterations, no complaint from sort of heritage. I think it's quite in order to ask the applicant to advise people who use the facility over what we would consider to be the optimum routes. I'm persuaded by page 64 in the report, simply because of the nature of the storage that is likely to take place, and therefore I hope it won't be serviced by the heaviest of goods vehicles, that it will be mainly sort of van and other based. So I'm happy to support, Chair.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't have a problem with this application, other than the point which has been raised by Councillor Mrs. Spray and yourself, and also by the Parish Council. And like many people who live in rural areas, we do have a terrible problem with large lorries now using rural lanes, and it's quite dangerous for other drivers, and also has the problem of wrecking the lanes. And this presumably is why in RLP 38, which is on slide 6 as referred to, there is a number of provisos to granting permission for conversion of rural buildings, one of which is that the scale and frequency of traffic generated can be accommodated on the road system without adverse effects on the road system itself. Even I take the point about the actual location. I mean, I know exactly where this farm is, and I know exactly the building. Even the shortest route to the A131 the road is extremely narrow, and there are actually 2 very, very sharp bends with very limited visibility. And to have a large articulated lorry going down there is would not be a very good idea. I do sort of have a general problem with agricultural buildings being granted to B8, because once they've got permission for B8, you really have absolutely no control over what goes on in those buildings. And I certainly have in my ward an example of a large barn which is now being used as a distribution centre for DHL, with huge lorries coming up every day, and lots of vans then collecting various goods and leaving from there. But so my problem really is the large lorries. And I don't know whether it would be possible to add a condition that articulated lorries should not use, or the B8 use should not include articulated lorries. I'm quite sure how that would be possible to word that, but I just wonder whether they can have a comment from the officers as to whether it'd be possible to put some kind of condition on to prevent the use of, to prevent articulated lorries accessing this site. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Parker. I'm going to ask Chris to come back on this.
Thank you, Councillor Parker, for the question. Obviously, officers note the concern that's being raised, and I think it's a fair point as well that you raise in terms of policy, in terms of the reuse of the buildings and the wide uses that policy provides for. However, that is obviously provided for within the policy. And again, going back to the previous item, maybe that's something in the future that we need to have a look at. But in terms of the current proposal, it does sit within the policy requirement of RLP 38. On the vehicle point and the routing, again, absolutely understand the concerns that members are raising, and also the concerns that the parish council have raised as part of this application, but the wider concerns that residents have raised as well. The issue we have is that this is obviously public highway, and really, in the absence of an objection from the county highways department saying that the intensity or frequency of the use and the number of vehicle movements using it, I think that does leave us in a very difficult position with this application. An informative on the decision notice to the applicant advising drivers of a route to access is certainly achievable along the lines that have been discussed. I think a condition, I think the difficulty we would fall into there is actually whether or not it meets the strict tests for the imposition of a planning condition, and actually whether or not it's actually necessary in the first place, given the absence of an objection from the County Highways Department. But I completely understand the point that you have raised. I think if there was a difficulty or there was a concern being raised, that could potentially open up that possibility. But in the absence of an objection, I think we are on difficult grounds, and I think it's already been picked up in the debate, but the size of the unit and the height of the building may well inform the types of vehicles that are then accessing the site. But you're absolutely right. In the future, obviously, there may be further applications here. Obviously, each one would need to be considered on their merits. So this would establish the BH use as part of the part of the agricultural building. But my suggestion, I think, officer's advice to members this evening would be in respect of an informative, as opposed to going down a condition route for either the route, which I think we would certainly say is not enforceable and wouldn't meet the test for a planning condition, but equally the size of the vehicles. I think we would struggle to justify that as well. Hopefully that helps, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Mrs. Parker, you'd like to come back?
Yes, please. Could I just ask Chris, could we, I noticed a point about the condition. I do think this is another area that we do need to look at, because allowing agricultural buildings anywhere to be used for B8 use is just asking for lots of lorries on these roads, and the roads are just not built to withstand them for start off. But would it be possible to include within an informative, I don't know if it would do much good, but does some reference to the size of lorries, and not to encourage, to suggest that no articulated lorries should be allowed to use this site?
The problem we have with the existing ones in my ward are that the containers arrive overnight and unload, and then the vans take the stuff out the next day. It's the big containers that arrive late at night and first thing in the morning. Now, we can't really stop them other than getting highways on site to do something about the roads, which is something I'm working on at the moment, to stop the lorries coming through the little lanes. So perhaps that's the process we've got to go through to Brentford, rather than set a condition. Did you want to come back on Councillor Parker's comment? No. Councillor Mrs. Spray, I believe you did move it, and I believed it was seconded by Councillor Mann. Am I right?
Yes, I think so. I think I got in first moving it. So I'm happy to confirm that. And also with an informative, I appreciate that a condition is probably A, not suitable, and B, even if it were, is pretty well unenforceable. So let's go for an informative with as best wording as we can get for the applicant to advise those using the sites to use the most suitable route. I'm happy with that. Thank you, Chairman.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put that to the vote now. Councillor Abbott.
For.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
4.
Councillor Monday.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Abstain.
Councillor Ritchie.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
4.
Councillor Wrench.
4.
Thank you, members. That application has been granted with the informative. That brings us to the end of our planning applications. We now come on to item 6. We don't often have an item 6. This is quite exciting. We've got conservation area character appraisals and management plan. These are going to be presented by Alex. And the first one is the Fearing Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan. It can be found on pages 67 to 109. Over to Alex.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good evening, members. Please bear with me while I share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that.
Yes.
Excellent. I just want to start by providing you with some background to the overall project. As you can see from slide 1, Place Services were appointed in November 2018 to produce 4 appraisals for the Great Bardfield, Fearing, Kelvedon and Weathersfield conservation areas. The first 2 are before you this evening, and Weathersfield will follow in the coming months. This is part of a larger project to complete several appraisals in the coming couple of years. Place Services have also been appointed in January of this year to produce an appraisal for the Braintree conservation area, but this work is still at the early stages. Moving to slide 2, this slide provides a summary of the conservation area appraisals and management plans. The purpose of the character appraisals are to provide an analysis of the conservation areas which will inform future development and design with regard to the sensitivities of the historic environments and their unique characters. The purpose of the management plans are to identify issues facing the conservation areas and to recommend management proposals which address the issues both in the short and long term. So moving on to the Fearing Conservation Area Character Appraisal Management Plan. So slide 4 provides some background, general background on the Fearing Conservation Area. It was designated on the 27th of May 1976 and no review has taken place since its designation. It is shown on the map in the yellow outline, and as you can see it covers quite a relatively small area. Moving to slide 5, this sets out the different sections in the appraisal. Just to go through this briefly, section 1 provides an introduction to the appraisal, including a brief summary, the purpose of the appraisal, and the planning policy context. Section 2 provides information on the context and the general character of the Fearing Conservation Area and its origin, evolution, and details of heritage assets. Section 3 provides an in-depth character analysis of the conservation area, including land use, views, the contribution of specific buildings, and no boundary changes are proposed as part of the appraisal. Section 4 discusses opportunities for enhancement, including issues such as car parking, access and integration, inappropriate modern development, neutral contributors, public realm, and site-specific details. Section 5 is the management plan for the conservation area. It covers issues such as the local heritage list, enforcement, maintenance, tree management, and the public realm. And section 6 is the appendices. Slide 7 provides details of the public consultation. The consultation took place between the 23rd of August and the 23rd of September 2019. A joint drop-in event for both the Kelvedon and Fearing appraisals was held on the 4th of September 2019 at the Fearing Community Centre. 5 responses from 4 consultees were received as part of the consultation. These are summarised on the table 1 on pages 71 to 76 of the agenda. Running through some of these key issues raised, they include the suggestion of the introduction of an Article 4 direction for the conservation area. An Article 4 direction removes some of the permitted development rights for properties within the designated area, meaning that planning permission will be required for works. The introduction of an Article 4 area is not within the scope of this appraisal and would require a separate project and resources. This would involve a robust justification and initial survey work, as the article cannot be applied retrospectively, continued monitoring and implementation, and may result in an increase of planning applications for development management. Obviously, the extent of the work needed is relative to the size of the article area. Braintree District currently only has one Article 4 direction at Silver End due to its history as a garden village in association with the Crittall Company, recognising its importance in the history of modern architecture and planning. Therefore, the use of an Article 4 directions isn't particularly common and is used in specific circumstances for a particular purpose. Permitted development rights are already more restrictive in conservation areas. So just to summarise, the implementation is beyond the scope of this appraisal. The appraisal and management plan doesn't recommend the introduction of an Article 4 direction, but it doesn't rule it out as something which could be looked at in the future. Other comments include additional candidates to be considered for the inclusion on a local heritage list, including those proposed by the Kelvedon and Fearing Heritage Society. The local list is a long-term project and ambition by the council, being led by the development management team. The appraisal does not create a local list, but recommends candidates within the conservation area subject to further research. The list provided by the Heritage Society also included several candidates outside of the conservation area, which is beyond the scope of this appraisal to consider. Place Services considered the suggestions of the Heritage Society and they have made their own recommendations in the appraisal. They recommend that only the old school on Colgrafshire Road within the Fearing Conservation Area be considered for local listing subject to further analysis. The list proposed by the Heritage Society can be reconsidered in more detail as part of the wider local list project. Moving on to a comment around the lack of consideration of the Fearing Neighbourhood Development Plan and Design Guide. The Fearing Neighbourhood Development Plan, including the Design Guide, is at an early stage and was not available when the appraisal was being prepared. The Neighbourhood Plans Regulation 14 consultation closed on the 29th of March of this year. Although there is some overlap, the documents have different purposes and functions, and it would not be good practice for the conservation area appraisal to be led by the Neighbourhood Plan. Having reviewed the relevant sections of the Neighbourhood Plan and Design Guide, officers do not consider that there is any substantial conflict between the documents. As the Fearing Neighbourhood Development Plan and Design Guide progress, they will gain their own weight as part of the Braintree Development Plan when planning applications are considered. There are also a number of comments relating to the conservation area boundary and proposed additional satellite conservation areas. The first comment related to Fearingbury Manor and Prested Hall and suggests that they and their surrounding areas should be considered for additional conservation areas. Both sites are located some distance from the Fearing Conservation Area, and consideration of additional satellite conservation areas is beyond the scope of this appraisal and would consider separate work. Both Fearingbury Manor and Prested Hall are statutory listed in their own right. Creating a conservation area around them and their setting would not afford them any additional protection. Moving to slide 9, this covers a comment requesting an extension of the conservation area to the cricket pitch and the Rye Mill Lane area due to the view of the Fearing Church, as shown on the slide, an association with a Constable sketch of the church. Also to cover the area around the Grade 2 listed Rye Mill House, which can also be seen on the slide. Although this is an important view as recognised at figure 15 of the appraisal, the view contributes to the setting of the conservation area but not its significance. The location is too detached from the existing conservation area, and extending the conservation area to this point would undermine its special interest, and Rye Mill House already benefits from protection due to its statutory listing. Comments were also received requesting a satellite conservation at Gore Pit. The location on the junction of Fearing Hill and Imworth Road to include the Blue Anchor Public House, Gore House and its wall, Cobbermoat Cottage and Wayside Cottage. As already covered, the creation of an additional satellite conservation area is beyond the scope of this appraisal. As shown on the map, both the Blue Anchor Public House and Cobbermoat Cottage have statutory protection through being listed buildings. Wayside Cottage and Gore House have some protection through being in the setting of these listed buildings. So moving on to summary and recommendation, there are no proposed boundary changes as part of the appraisal. As set out on page 77 of the agenda, the recommendation is to approve the Fearing Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan as a material consideration when Braintree District Council is carrying out its planning functions. If approved, the document will be published on the Council's website. As required by legislation, the Council will notify the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, as well as Historic England, and notices will be placed in the London Gazette and a local newspaper. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. Does any member wish to speak on this item? Or does anyone wish to move the recommendation, which can be found on page 68? Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, first of all, to Alex for the preparation and presentation of the reports, and also to consultees, those who took the trouble to submit their comments. I read through, I realised we're just talking about the Fearing one to start with, but I did read through them all and actually really enjoyed doing that. They are very positive and actually really interesting documents, a lot of very interesting detail in there about our district. So yes, I am happy to move the recommendation. This is just on the Fearing Conservation Area Appraisal and Management Plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Does it find a seconder?
It does, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Did you wish to speak, or are you?
If I may, Chair, I'd echo that. I found all three documents extremely interesting. Learnt a lot. I think about these villages myself, and I think the consultation responses have been very effectively dealt with in this report and in the other two. But confining myself to this one, happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Yes, I found it interesting. One of the farmhouses in the report is actually where I had and where I lived as a little girl. So it brought me back and took me back many years. I think we have to put this to the vote. Yeah. Councillor Abbott.
For.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson, can you hear me? No. Councillor Johnson, have you faded again? Has it faded again? It's not looking at me. Okay, I'll move on to Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you. I'll go back to Councillor Johnson once more. Councillor Johnson, can you hear me?
I think he's frozen.
Chairman, it does look like Councillor Johnson is frozen, but he's still shown as being in attendance in the meeting. Members, sorry, I've just had a message that Councillor has just now left the meeting. For the purpose of the vote, the meeting is still quorate and can proceed. Thank you, Chairman.
That recommendation has been moved, seconded and agreed by the committee. Thank you very much, Alex. We'll move on to the Great Bardfield presentation, which is at page 111. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Please bear with me again while I share my screen. Thank you. So next is the Great Bardfield Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan. Slide 13 provides some background information to the conservation area. It was designated on the 2nd of October 1969 and no review has taken place since its designation. To save repetition, all three of the appraisals before you this evening follow the same format, so I won't go through them again in detail. However, worthy of note is whereas the Fearing appraisal just had one character area due to its size, Great Bardfield is split into 5 distinct character areas, which can be seen on the map. As we're Fearing, no boundary changes are proposed as part of the appraisal. A consultation took place on the Great Bardfield Appraisal and Management Plan on the 22nd of June to the 19th of July 2019. A well-attended drop-in event was held on the 27th of June at Great Bardfield Town Hall. As shown on slide 17, responses from 2 consultees were received as part of the consultation. They are summarised in Table 1 at pages 114 to 117 of the agenda. Both comments were generally supportive of the document, but raised a few issues. The issues raised included parking within the conservation area, which is acknowledged as an issue for Great Bardfield, as with many other conservation areas, and is discussed within the appraisal. Solutions are likely to involve other partner organisations, including Essex Parking Partnership and the Highways Authority. The Parish Council response included a request that the boundary line of the conservation area be extended from Dunmow Road to Braintree Road to include the moors/valley of the brook. This can be seen roughly in the red circle on the map. Place Services have responded to this, saying that the land reference contributes positively to the conservation area's character, appearance and overall significance. It is not, however, itself of significance, and as such it would not meet the threshold for inclusion. The land remains an invaluable contributor, which would be afforded protection as setting, and officers agree with this. The Parish Council also asked a number of general planning related questions, and the answers from Place Services and officers can be seen in Table 1 of the agenda. Moving on to summary and recommendation. Again, there are no boundary changes proposed as part of the appraisal. The recommendation as set out on page 118 of the agenda is to approve the Great Bardfield Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan as a material consideration when Braintree District Council is carrying out its planning functions. And again, if approved, the same steps will take place as per the Fearing appraisal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you. Members.
Councillor Mann, happy to move recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Does it find a seconder?
I'm happy to second, Chairman. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Parker, you wish to speak?
Oh, only I was going to move as well. But just again to echo, as I haven't spoken before on the management plans. Thank you very much for all the work that's gone into them. Really excellent documents. Very interesting, and some interesting sort of recommendations for future management, particularly really one thing that struck me was the importance of colour and actually the intention that must be paid to the public realm, which I think we have a lot of inconsistency with the style of litter bins, signs, etc., etc. So yes, some very positive recommendations, and yes. If the others hadn't got there before me, I would have been very happy to move, but very happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll now put this to the vote as it's been moved and seconded. This is the recommendation for Great Bardfield Conservation Area. Councillor Abbott.
4.
Councillor Bowers.
4.
Councillor Cunningham.
4.
Councillor Horner.
4.
Councillor Johnson, are you back?
Yeah, I keep dropping in and out. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Are you?
Sorry, and for the previous one, I'm 4, and for the Fearing one as well, if you didn't hear me.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Councillor Mann.
4.
Councillor Monday.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
4.
Councillor Ritchie.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
4.
And Councillor Wrench.
4.
Thank you. That is unanimous. Thank you, members. That brings us on to the final one this evening, and this is the Kelvedon Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan. And I'll go straight over to Alex again. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll just share my screen again. Yeah, so next is the Kelvedon Conservation Area Appraisal and Management Plan. So slide 21 provides some background to the Kelvedon Conservation Area. It was designated on the 19th of June 1969 and again amended in November 1989. There are no previous appraisals or management plan for the conservation area. Again, the format is largely the same for all three appraisals, so I won't go through that in detail. As shown on slide 23, this time the conservation area is split into 7 distinct character areas. There are also 3 proposed boundary changes recommended in the appraisal, which I'll come on to next. So as part of the appraisal, the conservation area boundary has been reviewed to reflect changing methodologies of good practice. As slide 24 shows, 3 revisions are proposed to the conservation area boundary, and I'll go through these in turn on the next slides. So as shown on slide 25, the first proposed reduction is to exclude the area of car showrooms and garages on Station Road to reflect the current land use and significance, and you can see some of the images on the slide. The second proposed reduction is to exclude the recent development of Barnfield to reflect current land use and significance. As can be seen from the photos, it is a fairly recent housing development and doesn't contain the special character or significance to be retained in the conservation area. The third proposed reduction is to exclude the area of modern housing along World's End Lane and the former floodplain to reflect current land use and significance. As can be seen from the photos, this is a single track narrow lane with mostly large, fairly recent housing set back from the lane. It exhibits quite a different character to the rest of the conservation area. There are a couple of objections to this reduction, which I'll pick up on later slides. So as shown on slide 28, a consultation took place between the 23rd of August and the 23rd of September 2019. A joint drop-in event for both the Kelvedon and Fearing appraisals was held on the 4th of September at Fearing Community Centre. 8 responses were received as part of the consultation. A full summary of these can be seen on Table 1 on pages 177 to 183 of the agenda. The main issues raised include the suggestion of an introduction of an Article 4 direction. I think this was covered under the Fearing appraisal, and it's the same points here, so I won't go through those again. And the same with the local heritage list. There were concerns raised about tree protection. As I'm sure members are aware, trees within conservation areas benefit from automatic protection. Therefore, trees within the 3 areas proposed to be removed from the conservation area, which are not already protected in their own right, would remove the benefit of that automatic protection. The Council's Landscape Services team have been out to the 3 areas to assess whether any trees being removed from the conservation area need to be protected in their own right that aren't so already. There were also comments on the conservation area boundary, which I'll come on to on some later slides. Other comments included a request that Marla's Armhouse on Church Street not be added to the local list due to concerns the listing may impose costs on the maintenance of the building. Also, in the distant future, it might be necessary to demolish and rebuild the building. The first point here is that the appraisal does not create a local list, but identifies buildings which should be considered for local listing subject to further analysis. The formal local listing, if it were to happen in the future, should not impose any maintenance costs beyond the normal maintenance required for any building. It has recognised the importance of the building and offering them further protection from insensitive development. However, this does not mean that no development can occur in the future. The planning balance must be employed as part of any application, be that the demolition or an extension, etc. Moving to slide 31, this shows comments received requesting the removal of properties in Bellingham Place from the conservation area. This area can be roughly seen on the map as the red circle. The comments suggested the following: that their removal would reflect the current land use and significance. The area has no archaeological significance, and the 6 houses in Bellingham Place are a modern development built around 1999. Most of the properties are not visible from the high street. Removal of them would ensure repairs and general maintenance could be carried out using more modern materials that will stand the test of time, and that removing the properties would not cause any substantial harm to the conservation area. Place Services and Officers' response to this is that although modern, the appearance and form of the buildings reflects the character of Kelvedon through their style and colour palette, for instance, and they're a good example of modern housing within the conservation area. Keeping them in shows that modern development can be acknowledged as positive contributors to the significance of the conservation area, and provides an example of how sympathetic building styles and materials can reinforce the character of the conservation area. Due to the proximity of listed buildings and positioning, modern materials would not be appropriate, and the removal of the buildings from the conservation area would, as the comment suggests, encourage this. Slide 32 picks up on some comments which requested that World's End Lane is not removed from the conservation area due to its special character. It is suggested that its removal will leave views of the ancient scheduled monument and the old Crab and Winkle line less well protected. Place Services and Officers' response is that the lane does not exhibit the characteristics typical of other sections in the conservation area. Removal should not compromise the significance of the conservation area, as the lane still forms an important part of the setting of the conservation area. The development along the lane largely dates back to the 1960s and is of no historic significance. The scheduled monument also has a great deal of protection due to its scheduling, and I'll come on to the monument in a little more detail in the next slide. Slide 32 relates to further comments on World's End Lane, this time requesting that a property called Marnie's and the ancient burrows are included within the conservation area. The ancient burrows being referenced is reference to the scheduled monument, an Anglo-Saxon burial mound, which can be seen on the map as the orange cross-hatching. As previously covered, the scheduled monument already has a great deal of protection. The bottom right photo is a view from World's End Lane towards the monument. As you can see, it is no longer easily visible. It is not really associated with the conservation area, either chronologically or functionally, apart from the very early origins of the settlement. Marnie's is of no special architectural or historic interest. It has recently been granted planning permission in June last year for works including the replacement of the first floor and roof. This work is currently taking place and can be partially seen in the top right photo. Moving on to the recommendations. The recommendations are set out on page 184 of the agenda. They are to 1. Approve the boundary changes to the Kelvedon Conservation Area as shown at figure 5 on page 11 of the appraisal. And 2. Approve the Kelvedon Conservation Area appraisal and management plan as a material consideration when Braintree District Council is carrying out its planning functions. Thank you.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, thank you for the officer's report. Generally agree with most of that. I mean, clearly the garages area near the railway station doesn't exactly shout architectural importance. But I am concerned about taking World's End Lane out, and I noticed that several people have made representations to keep it in. The officer on a number of occasions said about, development being more modern and not having special architectural importance. Well, I've just checked the Witham Town Centre Conservation Area. I mean, that's got a 1960s, early 1970s, very modernist concrete shopping precinct in the middle of it. It's got several areas of backland which have been redeveloped for flats in the last few years. And I don't believe there's a big move on to change the boundaries there. So I particularly think, because there are local representations on this, that we should revise the recommendation to include World's End Lane. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anyone else wish to speak?
Chairman.
Councillor, Mrs. Spray.
Sorry, I realised I muted myself. Could we have a comment from the officer possibly on that point from Councillor Abbott, just out of interest?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. Thank you for the point in question. Just to respond, it's not necessarily to do with the age of the buildings, as you can see by us including, but the Bellingham Place still in the conservation area. A lot of it's to do with the character exhibited by the area and its reference to the conservation area. So driving down and walking along Wales End Lane, it is quite a different, distinct character to the rest of Kelvedon conservation area. So they are fairly modern buildings, as we said. In response to the Witham conservation area, I think that was reviewed in 2009 under different guidance before the 2012 MPPF. The review of the Kelvedon conservation area reflects sort of up-to-date guidance and has recommended that Wales End Lane be removed. It would still form the setting of the conservation area, so it'd have some protection through that. But basically, we're just going off the professional advice of Place Services, who are the professionals in this area. I think that's all I can say, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Councillor Abbott, did you wish to come back, or are you content with that response?
I stand by my comments, Madam Chairman, and I think particularly when you've got local representations, when people have made the effort to say that, I can totally understand why the garages area is coming out. I completely understand that, but not Wales End Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I need someone to move the recommendation anyhow. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you, Alex, for coming back on that. Yes, I'll move recommendation. And just one other comment for me. I think it's an interesting and a good observation, actually, that new buildings done well can actually add to a conservation area. They don't necessarily detract, but it is important that they are done extremely well. So, yeah, happy to move. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Does it find a seconder? Councillor Mrs. Parker?
Yes, I'm happy to second that, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Well, members, it has been moved and seconded that we approve the recommendation, which can be found on page 174. I can put it to the vote. Councillor Abbott?
For.
Councillor Bowers?
For.
Councillor Cunningham?
For.
Councillor Horner?
For.
Councillor Johnson?
For.
Councillor Mann?
For.
Councillor Monday?
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker?
For.
Councillor Ritchie?
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray?
For.
Councillor Wrench?
For.
Thank you, members. That has been agreed unanimously, and I'd like to thank Alex for coming along and presenting these three very interesting documents, and we look forward to seeing some more in the future. And that brings us now to the end of our planning meeting, and I'd like to thank you all for your attendance and say good night, and we'll close the meeting at 21:33, a bit sooner than last time. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, members. Members, before we close the webcast for this broadcast of this planning committee on the 7th of July, I'd just like to remind members that you would have received a survey from our team asking you for your feedback on this meeting. It's very important that we do have your feedback. I'd also like to remind you that the council will be retaining some performance data relating to your connectivity to this meeting in the event of a legal challenge. Thank you very much for bearing us this evening, and good night. And please, can the webcasting officer please confirm that the YouTube broadcast has stopped?